The Steel type was introduced in Gen 2 to nerf the first generation's overpowered Psychic type, and since Gen 6 it's become one of the best types in the game since the introduction of Fairies. However, before then it was pretty much purely a defensive typing, resisting 11 of the 17 types in the game. But is bulk alone gonna get me through this challenge where any Pokemon that faints is boxed forever, no items from the bag are allowed in battle, and I can't overlevel my Pokemon? Well, to find out, I need to pick the only starter that turns into a Steel type, Piplup, which fortunately happens to be my favorite first stage starter of all time, and I'd love to hear what yours is down in the comments below. Miss Univa, check the PC. Oh, gee, Rowan, you need a password on this thing.
You're not supposed to see that.
Now, before we challenge the first gym, we do have access to another Pokemon that eventually turns into a Steel type, Onix. I reluctantly add it to the team since Onix is a pretty abysmal Pokemon, especially considering the fact that we got a plus special attack minus defense nature. That being said, the Duke and the Emperor are the only two Pokemon we can add to the team before challenging Rourke. And what you've probably noticed is that neither Piplup or Onix are actually Steel types yet, because unfortunately there's no way to get a single Steel type before the first gym, but we can at least get access to some before we challenge Gardenia. That means we're only going to get to use Emperor and the Duke until we have an actual Steel type on the team, at which point we're going to have to box them both until they actually evolve into a Steel type. As for Rourke, his entire team is very weak to water, and he only has not very effective moves versus Onix, so this fight is pretty much free. But that much is expected from Rourke the Dork. And speaking of dorks, on my way to Floroma Town, Emperor evolves into Prinplup, and I don't know what to say, man. Prinplup is just one of those awkward adolescent-looking mid-stage evolutions that I can't stand. Luckily though, it's finally time to box Prinplup since I find my first real Steel type, Bronzor. And the king here isn't just awesome for having the levitate ability, it was also caught holding a metal coat. And since I used the universal Pokemon randomizer to make it possible to get trait evolutions in single player, leveling up once with this metal coat is gonna evolve the Duke into a Steelix. But our Steel encounters don't quite end there, as we can find a Nosepass in Mount Coronet, and leveling up that Nosepass once in Mount Coronet will evolve it into the Steel type Probopass. Let me know in the comments, Probo Smash or Probo Pass? Now that we actually have a team of Steel types, it's time to take on the second gym leader, Gardenia, who is actually kind of a threat to our team. She leads off with Turtwig, so I send in the Duke and go for Screech right away to lower its defense. This is immediately neutralized by Turtwig going for Reflect, so I go ahead and go for another one the following turn as Turtwig sets up the Sun. I then expect a Rock Smash to do about half health, but I end up getting a critical hit, taking out the Turtwig. Gardenia then sends in Cherrim, and because it's in the Sun, it does get boosted speed and attacking power, which does massive damage to the Duke as I have to heal up with an Oranberry. After landing a Screech, I am in range of being taken out by this Grass Knot, so I decide to swap out into Caesar, who's got much better special defense. Even still, Caesar's getting hit pretty hard by these Grass Knots since it does damage based on how heavy the Pokemon is. After a held Oranberry heals me up a little bit, I go for a Rock Tomb to lower this Cherrim's speed, but the sunlight also fades, which means that it's gonna be slower the next turn, so I can outspeed and take it out with the following Rock Tomb. Now, Turtwig and Cherrim have been hard enough to deal with, but now we gotta go up against Roserade. And a Grass Knot from this thing takes Caesar down to just 6 HP, after which I miss a Rock Tomb, so I decide to swap out into the King, who's our only Pokemon left at full HP. The Grass Knot on the Switch doesn't do that much, but the second one does get a critical hit, leaving me at just 16 HP, which does trigger my Oranberry, but I do manage to land a Hypnosis. The Roserade of course stays asleep the first turn, and Extrasensory looks like it's gonna be a 4-hit KO. Roserade once again staying asleep, I decide to go for a Confuse Ray so that it might hit itself if it wakes up. But it just ends up staying asleep the third turn, so I go for another Extrasensory, which takes it down into a range that activates its Citrus Berry. The Roserade then stays asleep for a 4th turn in a row as I get a critical hit Extrasensory, taking down Roserade to what must be 1 HP. Gardenia then goes for a Super Potion as I get another Extrasensory in, and at this point Roserade is guaranteed to wake up, but I did hit that Confuse Ray, and it does hit itself in confusion as I take it down into the red again. The following turn, the Roserade doesn't snap out of confusion, and it does end up hitting itself, getting us the win and the second gym badge, but that was a little bit too close for comfort at times. And speaking of discomfort, we pretty much immediately have to take on Team Galactic Commander Jupiter, who starts out with a Zubat, so I decide to lead with Caesar, who just ends up outspeeding, taking it out immediately with a Rock Throw. Next is our Skuntank, and since before Generation 6, the Steel type actually resists Dark, and this thing doesn't have Flamethrower like in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, we can just resist everything this thing throws at us and eventually take it out with Rock Smash. Now that we beat the gym, we finally get access to the Explorer Kit and thus the Underground. And look, while the Underground isn't quite as flashy as in BDSP, at least we can start looking for a fossil, and in Platinum, unlike Diamond and Pearl, they made it so that the fossil you can get is based on your trainer ID. And since my ID ends in an even number 4, I can pick up the Skull Fossil and thus get myself a Shieldon. And I'm such a huge fan of fossil Pokemon that I'm really glad we get to use Bastiodon in this run, which is a pretty underrated Pokemon in my opinion. Let me know what your favorite fossil Pokemon is down in the comments. Badly scarred wooden tools are displayed. They apparently dug out coal using these tools in the olden days. What is this, the Minecraft Museum? Before heading to Hardhome, I make sure to pick up the TM for Earthquake and teach it to Duke. But we're not going to be able to put that Earthquake to use at all against Fantina since all 3 of our Pokemon have Levitate, and oh boy was this a fight to remember. You see, here's the thing, Duskull's got Will-O-Wisp and we don't want anything that isn't Shieldon to get burned. The Chief's only attacking move is Takedown, so it really doesn't matter if it gets burned, but I make sure to go for Taunt before swapping out and getting Pursuited into Duke. I then go for a Rock Throw, which is a pretty clean 3-hit KO as I get hit by a Pursuit, but then the Taunt wears off, which means that it's probably going to go for Will-O-Wisp, so I have to swap out the Duke into the Chief. After getting burned by Will-O-Wisp, I make sure to go for Taunt again, as the Duskull just goes for another Future Sight. This means we can once again safely swap in the Duke, as the Duskull just goes for a Shadow Sneak, literally doing 2 damage. Another Rock Throw does some decent damage, but it's not exactly looking like this is a guaranteed 3-hit KO. My suspicion is unfortunately then confirmed the next turn as I hit it into the red and the Duskull goes for a Future Sight and the Taunt wears off. Expecting the heal from Fantina, I go for a Rock Throw, but then I once again have to swap out into the Chief to dodge the Will-O-Wisp. The Chief then gets hurt by its burn, takes the Future Sight attack, and gets healed up by an Oranberry before it's time to go for the Taunt so the Duskull can't burn the Steelix. I then go ahead and swap out into the Duke again, but at this point we're actually accumulating quite a bit of damage taking all those Future Sight attacks. After getting hit by a couple of Shadow Sneaks, I miss a Rock Throw, and the following turn I even miss another, which means that we have to do this dance once again, swapping out into the Chief. And even though we're tanking all of Duskull's moves fairly well, we are getting pretty low on health because of this burn, so this is probably the last taunt we're going to be able to get off as I once again swap out into the Duke. This time, I do what I probably should have done right from the get-go and go for a Screech as I get hit by Pursuit. The next turn, I can then follow it up with a Rock Throw, which actually finally takes out the Duskull. Unfortunately, the Future Sight then takes me down below half as Fantina sends in her real threat Mismagius, and I heal up a bit with an Oranberry. Magical Leaf then hits me down to 29 HP as I go for a Screech on the Mismagius, having its defense. The next turn, Magical Leaf leaves me at just 8 HP as a Rock Throw takes the Mismagius below half and it heals up with a Citrus Berry. The Duke has at this point fought the good fight, so I decide to swap out into the King, who takes some massive damage from Shadow Ball. I was expecting Magical Leaf, but I guess it saw the kill with any move, and unfortunately the next turn I get confused and miss a Hypnosis. Knowing I can survive another non-crit Shadow Ball and even Confusion because of my Oranberry, I decide to risk Hypnosis, but I hit myself, so at this point the King has to swap out into Caesar. And because Caesar has some pretty goated special defense, and we resist Shadow Ball in this generation, we can tank Magical Leafs and Shadow Balls for days and use Thunder Wave to paralyze this thing. I then click Rock Tomb just in case the Mismagius outspeeds through Paralysis, but we get it down into the yellow and then get hit by another Shadow Ball. Fantina then uses her second Super Potion, but at this point, another couple Rock Throws are enough to take out the Mismagius, meaning we're only left with Fantina's Haunter. And this thing could be a problem with both Hypnosis and Confuse Ray, but it just decides to go for Shadow Claw, so I can get a para off with Thunder Wave. I then go for a Rock Throw, which looks like it's going to be a 2-hit KO, as the Haunter misses a Hypnosis, but the next Rock Throw doesn't take it out. On top of that, I manage to miss my next Rock Throw, which means that the Haunter gets off the Hypnosis, putting me to sleep. Hilariously though, the next couple of turns are just a status condition stalemate. The third turn of sleep, I still don't wake up, and the Haunter at this point manages to land a Confuse Ray as well. The fourth sleep turn, I do wake up though, and I manage to connect with my Rock Throw, meaning that we finally beat Fantina in what's probably the most infuriating fight I've ever done in one of my Nuzlocks. They call me Mr. Goods. No one knows my real name, no, not even I do. Oh, buddy, you underestimate the tax authorities.
I'm too little, so I don't know how to battle very good. The nice daycare lady's raising my Pokemon for me.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe all the atrocities this little girl must have seen because of this pervert. Since the level cap is now increased, we can finally get the Chief up to level 30, evolving it into Bastiodon. Which means we can progress on to Maylene's gym, which is literally a gym. And so I decided to get a quick workout in before moving on to the next gym leader, Maylene, and her fighting types. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I can stand on my hands for the duration of this fight, much less just the time it takes to take out this Meta-type. I instantly get hit by a Fake Out, which doesn't exactly help my case. Steelix then impressively tanks a Pure Power Stab super effective Drain Punch at above half health, taking out the Meta-type with an Earthquake. Maylene's next Mon is Machoke, and the only Pokemon I have that isn't weak to fighting is King, who still takes a fair amount of damage from a Karate Chop. The next Karate Chop gets a crit, taking me down low, but a Citrus Berry brings me up above half health, and a Hypnosis puts the Machoke to sleep. I then elect to go for a Confuse Ray just as a backup plan in case the Machoke wakes up, but it still just stays asleep the next turn, so I start setting up Iron defenses. This plan works out for 2 turns in a row as the Machoke stays asleep, but the 3rd turn it wakes up but fortunately hits itself in Confusion, so I can set up my final Iron defense. It then just hits itself in Confusion again, so I put it back to sleep with Hypnosis to not risk any of those Karate Chop crits. I'm even impressed by King's damage output with Extra Sensory, and the next turn, Machoke just stays asleep, so another Extra Sensory does the job. Maylene's Lucario is the exact reason we set up all those Iron defenses, because it can't go for Bone Rush since we've got the Levitate ability, but unfortunately we get instantly paralyzed by a Force Palm. Then after tanking a Drain Punch, I do manage to break through Para and put the Lucario to sleep. I then go for a Confuse Ray just as a little present for when Lucario wakes up, but the next turn, I just get paralyzed. I then go for an Extra Sensory, which barely does any damage at all, and Lucario wakes up, but it just ends up hitting itself in Confusion. This way, I can get in another Extra Sensory, which doesn't quite take it down to half. The Lucario then manages to break through the Confusion going for a Drain Punch, but it barely gets any health back since it doesn't do too much damage, and I can put it to sleep again with Hypnosis. I then hit it with another Extra Sensory, but what I probably should have done is swapped out into the Duke, hoped that it stayed asleep, and just gone for an Earthquake. And so, realizing my mistake after a couple of Extra Sensories, I decided to just click Hypnosis again, which I do manage to hit after Lucario lands a Drain Punch. At this point, I can at least safely swap in the Duke since Lucario's always going to stay asleep, but the next turn it manages to wake up, but a Drain Punch doesn't quite do enough to take me out, and a Citrus Berry heals me up above half, and a well-placed Earthquake finally takes out the Lucario, which just goes to show how awesome Steelix's defense is. Now defeating Maylene raises the level cap up to level 37, which means that we can finally bring Prinplup back onto the team, level it up to 36, and get ourselves an Empoleon. Not only that, the King also evolves into Bronzong. We also get access to the Heart Scale Move Tutor, which is pretty dang nifty.
So how's it going, Miss Unova? Buffing up your Pokemon, eh?
That's right, Barry. I'm aspiring to be the best. What are your dreams?
Like, I want my own theme song.
Our next opponent of the run is WWE Champion Crasher Wake and his Water types, which really isn't a good matchup for our Steel types either. For instance, this Gyarados has Earthquake, so I decide to lead off with the King, who's levitating above everyone else, so I can put it to sleep with Hypnosis before swapping out into Caesar. Unfortunately for me, however, the Gyarados gets a first turn wake up, hitting me with a Waterfall down below half health, which activates my Citrus Berry. However, of course, I miss my Thunder. The next turn, I do manage to survive this Waterfall just because of that Citrus Berry, and I don't flinch and connect with my Thunder, which means we don't have to use Plan B and take out the Gyarados. Wake then sends in Quagsire, so expecting a Mud Shot, I pivot out into King, who can dodge it with Levitate. This means that the Quagsire isn't going to go for Mud Shot the next turn, so I can safely swap in Emperor. It does go for a Yawn, but the Emperor, taking a note out of Gardenia's book, takes out the Quagsire with a single Grass Knot. This is going to mean we fall asleep because of the Yawn, which isn't a huge deal since this Float Soul doesn't have a single move that isn't not very effective. Unfortunately, we stay asleep to take a Crunch, and then another one, and then another one, healing us up with our Citrus Berry, and then yet another one before we wake up and can hit this thing with a Grass Knot, which actually does like a solid 70%. This does mean that even though this Float Soul has a Citrus Berry, we are going to be able to take it out with another Grass Knot the next turn. Finally, a pretty straightforward gym fight that wasn't an absolute hassle to be able to beat.
Listen, do you know about the Battle Frontier?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really.
Moving on to something I completely forgot about, Platinum allows us to capture Scyther. Not only is this a huge deal because I catch one with the Technician ability, now that we have access to Thief, we can just go and find another Bronzor, steal the Metal Coat, and evolve this thing into a Scizor. And if that's not enough awesomeness for you, now that we've reached Canalave City, we can go to Iron Island, help out Riley, and finally get that Riolu egg. I then have to do a whole lot of biking until the egg finally hatches, at which point we can give Riolu the Soothe Bell, and after about another hour of biking and maulding, Pharaoh finally evolves into Lucario. And with all those updates to the team, it's time to take on the Steel-type mirror match versus Byron. And since he leads with Magneton, I figured it's perfect to lead with the Duke, since after getting hit by a flash cannon, I can annihilate this thing's existence with an earthquake. After we've sentenced Magneton to a lifetime on the fridge door, Byron sends out his own Steelix. Expecting an earthquake here, I decide to swap out into the King, who dodges it with Levitate, and the next turn the Steelix sets up Sandstorm. Sadly, I miss my Hypnosis, which means we have to eat this flash cannon, but since Steelix's special attack isn't exactly something to write home about, it doesn't even matter that we miss the next one and have to tank another. This time, however, I do manage to land my Hypnosis, which means the next turn we can safely swap out into the Emperor. And since Empoleon outspeeds Steelix's pathetic base 30 speed, we can just go for a Surf, taking it out. This means Bastiodon's the only Pokemon left, and not wanting to risk it surviving a Surf and taking me out with a Metal Burst, I decide to swap out into the Chief as it just sets up an Iron defense. I then tank a quad-resisted Stone Edge and go for a Metal Sound to lower Bastiodon's special defense. It goes for another Iron defense, and I go for Metal Sound again since Bastiodon is a tanky boy. Sick of my antics, Byron decides to go for Taunt so that I can't get it down to -6 special defense, after which he goes for a Stone Edge and I get a critical hit Fire Blast, taking the Bastiodon down into the red, activating its Citrus Berry. At this point, I get hit with another Stone Edge and I was really hoping that another Fire Blast could take the Bastiodon out, but unfortunately it leaves it in the red so that Byron goes for a full restore. Since I'm not exactly afraid of what this Bastiodon can do, I just go for the subsequent 3 Fire Blasts, taking it out, winning us the 6th badge.
Do those that are immature as living beings evolve to ones more mature?
Okay, Professor, I get the point. I promise to make no more fart jokes ever.
That tremor, that wasn't a natural occurrence. Hey, old dude and kids, did you hear?
Now that we have access to the TM for Surf, I make sure to go pick up the TM for Thunderbolt, and at Fuego Ironworks, I can find myself a Magnemite. I name it Queen and start making my way towards Snow Point City. Which leads us to our next gym fight, Candace, which is actually the first time since Rourke that we actually have the type advantage in one of these gym fights. I decide to lead with Kaiser, who can instantly delete this Sneasel with a stab super effective Bullet Punch. Candace then sends in Piloswine, and expecting an Earthquake, I decide to swap out into King to dodge it with Levitate. Since it won't go for Earthquake against King, I'm now free to swap out into Pharaoh, who tanks a Stone Edge fairly well, after which it can just go for an Aura Sphere, deleting this Piloswine from existence. This means Candace has 2 of her Pokemon left, the first of which being Abomasnow, which sets up the Hail with its Snow Warning ability, and I made a big mistake here. I've been playing so many of the new Pokemon games recently that I totally forgot that before Generation 6, the weather setting ability set up the weather forever. And my original plan here was to try and just stall out the Hail so it would be a little bit easier to hit the Frostlass without its Snow Cloak ability, but eventually I realized that that wasn't going to be the case, so I just swapped in Kaiser. After getting it down into the red, I did have to deal with some full restore nonsense, but eventually I took it out with a Bullet Punch, which means she's only got Frostlass left. I decided to just risk the miss and go for a Bullet Punch right away, but it's just not quite enough to take out the Frostlass, activating its Citrus Berry. On top of that, it then goes for a double team to make it even more difficult to hit. Precisely for that reason, I decided not go for a Bullet Punch, which means I have to eat this Shadow Ball, but then I can go for an Aerial Ace, which is never gonna miss, netting us that 7th gym badge. After the fight, I decide it's time to bring Queen onto the team, leveling it up to level 30, evolving into Magneton, which means I just have to go to Mount Coronet and level up once in order to get myself a Magnezone. Now at this exact point in time, Cyrus is kind of standing in the way of our mission to be the best by trying to destroy the world. And while Cynthia's the kind of girl that we'd all travel through space and time and back for, I kind of meant it more as a figure of speech. Well, I guess since we're here, we might as well take on the Mad Titan himself, Galactic's boss, Cyrus. Leading off with Houndoom, this fight can be one of the trickiest in the entire game. Flamethrower ends up doing a little bit less than half of my health, after which I can take out the Houndoom in one swift hit with a Surf. This is going to prompt Cyrus to send in his Gyarados with Earthquake, so I obviously can't stay in with the Emperor, so I go ahead and swap out into the King, who can dodge the EQ with Levitate. Waterfall then ends up doing a little bit less than half, but unfortunately I miss my Hypnosis. Waterfall also has that really dangerous chance to flinch us here, but after taking us down to our Citrus Berry, I do manage to connect with the Hypnosis, putting the Gyarados to sleep, meaning that we can swap out the King for the Queen. Luckily, the Gyarados then stays asleep, meaning that I can just hit it with a Thunderbolt, which is obviously going to take it out in one hit. Seeing that the Pokemon Cyrus has left are Honchkrow, Crobat, and Weavile, we're in a pretty good spot if it weren't for the fact that Honchkrow has Heat Wave, which we can take exactly one of with Queen, but it's gonna be all we need to take out this Honchkrow with a single Thunderbolt. This means the next Pokemon Cyrus is gonna send out is Weavile, which can't really do much to threaten our Magnezone here, except go for a Fake Out to just waste a turn, after which it hits me with an Ice Punch and I just barely miss out on taking it out with a Flash Cannon. I decide at this point, since Queen is getting to pretty low health, to just swap in Kaiser to take the incoming Ice Punch, and then proceed to annihilate the Weavile with a Bullet Punch. At this point, all we have to face is a Crobat with 2 poison moves we're immune to, Air Slash and Confuse Ray. And since Kaiser doesn't have a good move to hit this Crobat with, I decide to swap out into the Duke to tank a couple of Air Slashes and go for a Thunder Fang, which does a healthy amount of damage. After that, the next Air Slash does flinch it though, so I decide to just play it safe here, swapping out the Duke for the Emperor. Empoleon did sustain quite a lot of damage from the Houndoom, but a Citrus Berry is a quick fix for that. I do, however, unfortunately get confused here by Confuse Ray, and of course hit myself, because what else would be my luck? The next turn we have a chance to flinch because of Air Slash and to be confused, but I do manage to land that Ice Beam, netting us the deathless win versus Cyrus.
Wow, you're really cool. You have 7 gym badges. All you need is 1 more to challenge the Pokemon League.
That's right, we have one final gym challenge to face before it's time to go up against the Elite Four Gauntlet.
Volkner can be a tricky gym leader to deal with, but since we have a ground type so he can't hit us with electric moves, and he has to hit us with Iron Tail against Steelix's massive defense, this is basically the perfect opportunity for Steelix to just set up 6 curses and get to max attack. On top of that, we can use 6 rock polishes to get from -6 to +6 speed, outspeeding every single Pokemon on Volkner's team. I'm sure this isn't exactly what Volkner was hoping for, but at this point, we deserve an easy gym badge. And speaking of Steelix and gym leaders, it's actually Jasmine that gives us the HM for Waterfall, which is really awesome since she's my favorite gym leader of all time. I just love how she cares for Amphi so much, but let me know what your favorite gym leader is down in the comments.
The objective is to reach the Pokemon League. That's right, at this point, all we have to do is make our way through Victory Road before it's time to take on the first Elite Four member, Aaron and his bug types. He starts out with Yanmega, so I decide to send in Queen, who resists every single move this thing has, but he just decides to go for a double team, which is met with a Thunderbolt that actually connects anyway, taking it out in 1 hit. Aaron then sends out his most problematic Pokemon Heracross, and I really don't want to get one-shot by a close combat here, so I swap out into the King, who still takes a fair amount of damage. I end up on 2 HP above half health, so I decide to risk it, but he just goes for Mega Horn, which leaves me on 8 HP, after which I heal up with a Citrus Berry. I don't expect a base extra sensory to take Heracross out here, but because of the special defense drop from close combat, I end up taking it out, which means Aaron sends in Vespiquen. I expect he'll try and take me out with attack order, so I swap in Queen, who can tank it easily. I decide to go for a Charge Beam here to try and fish for a special attack boost, but sadly, I just get a critical hit instead and no special attack boost. Scizor comes in with a critical hit of its own, but because I didn't get that special attack boost, Thunderbolt is not going to be enough to take out the Scizor, which means that Aaron just heals up to full. I decide to just go for a Charge Beam on the full restore turn, and this time I actually do get a special attack boost, so another X Scissor takes me down to my Citrus Berry range, taking out the Scizor with a Thunderbolt. Finally, Aaron only has Drapion left, which hits me with a super weak X Scissor, after which I hit it with a Thunderbolt that I was hoping was going to take it out, but nope, it leaves it in the red and gets the para. Fortunately though, that paralysis is going to mean that we outspeed the next turn, taking out the Drapion, beating the first Elite Four member. This means we have to go up against the ground type user Bertha, against whom we have a really bad type matchup. She leads off with Whiscash, so I decide to once again take a page out of Gardenia's book, going for a Grass Knot that doesn't get the KO, unfortunately. This does mean I get hit by an Earth Power, but because of the Emperor's massive special bulk, I manage to survive and get some health back with my Citrus Berry. Another Grass Knot is enough to take out the Whiscash, which means that Bertha sends in her next Pokemon, Hippowdon, setting up the Sand. But it's not going to be sticking around for long as I take it out with a single Surf, which means Bertha sends out her next Pokemon, Gliscor. Since it'll outspeed and kill us with an Earthquake, I decide to swap out into the King, who can dodge it, but Firefang still does pretty good damage as I manage to put it to sleep with Hypnosis. I now just have to take the risk and swap out into Emperor, as of course Gliscor stays asleep the first turn, but it also stays asleep the second turn, which means I can take it out with an Ice Beam. Now that we've dealt with Bertha's only real threat, we have to deal with a couple of super slow rock ground types that are both quad weak to Surf, which means that at this point we've effectively defeated half of what the Elite Four has to offer.
I like how you and your Pokemon earn the win by working as one.
Well, that's kind of you to say, Bertha, but we're certainly going to need some kind of unified front to be able to face the most difficult trainer of the challenge so far, Flint and his fire types. The fight starts out the same way as versus Cyrus, where Houndoom takes us down to just above half health and we take it out with a Surf. But this is where the real difficulty of the fight begins as he sends in Infernape. I immediately swap out into Bronzong to dodge the incoming Earthquake. I then expect to be able to survive at least one non-crit Earthquake, which does end up happening, and I manage to hit my Hypnosis. This is huge as I can now swap out back into the Emperor as the Infernape stays asleep so I can take it out with a Surf. And while Infernape is a threat that I'm really happy to deal with, the Magmortar is a huge problem as well since it's got Thunderbolt. It also outspeeds every Pokemon except Lucario, so I decide to just sack Emperor here and go for an Aqua Jet, which unfortunately means we're gonna get our first death. Or at least that's what would have happened if this thing would have gone for Thunderbolt, or if we would have swapped out anything into this Flamethrower, but Empoleon actually ends up surviving the Flamethrower on 2 HP. This unfortunately puts me in a similar position since I can't swap anything in or it'll die, so I just decide to go for another Aqua Jet to take it down into the low red, but somehow we managed to get a high roll actually taking out the Magmortar. My plan there was actually to get it low into the red so that he'd go for a full restore and I could just take it out with an Earthquake from Steelix, but that works out as well. After taking out the Flareon with a Surf, I swap out into the Duke as Rapidash comes in, who doesn't tank a Flare Blitz very well, but I am going to be able to tank another non-crit one after my Citrus Berry. Rapidash oddly goes for Bounce here instead of another Flare Blitz, but that's fine by me since the next turn, even though I do get paralyzed, we do end up landing the Earthquake, taking out the Rapidash, winning us the fight versus Flint, somehow deathless. Which means we now only have one more Elite Four member to face before it's time to go up against Big Bad Cynthia. And that Elite Four member is Lucian, who can normally be an absolute nightmare to face, but you might remember me saying that the Steel type was actually introduced to counter the Psychic type, and we're about to put that theory up to the test as I set up an Agility and Swords Dance while Mr. Mime sets up Reflect and Light Screen. I then go for a second Swords Dance as the Mr. Mime hits me with a Thunderbolt for about 30% of my health. I go for a final Swords Dance setting up to +6 as Mr. Mime hits me with a Thunderbolt, and I'm just praying that I don't get paralyzed, and luckily that is not what happens. And because of that agility, I outspeed every single Pokemon on Lucian's team, and with +6, they don't stand a chance at surviving these Iron Heads and X-Scissors from Scizor. And I gotta say, it is really nice to get to show exactly why Scizor was consistently up in the top 5 best Pokemon in the meta in the 4th generation. And so, with a deathless Steel-type streak, the boss music started playing. Could I get through this at all, much less deathless? It's time to face the GOAT
versus Cynthia.
With a full team in the back, I made a strategy that I thought could take me across the finish line. But in case I got just a little bit of bad luck, I was done for. The first turn, the King gets hit by a Shadow Ball, almost taking it down to half health as I managed to put it to sleep with a Hypnosis. I then take a page out of Lucian's book and set up a light screen before I go ahead and swap the King out for Kaiser. The Spiritomb stays asleep, and the following turn I go for an Agility to double my speed as the Spiritomb continues to sleep soundly. I then go for a Swords Dance to boost my attack power as Spiritomb decides to wake up, going for a Shadow Ball, doing barely anything with my light screen up. I then get hit by yet another Shadow Ball, which does lower my special defense right as the light screen expires. But at this point, I'm committed to the strategy, so if Kaiser has to go down, so be it. Another Shadow Ball takes me down to about half and manages to get the special defense drop, but at this point, an Iron Head is enough to take out the Spiritomb. Next up is Cynthia's ace monster, Big Bad Garchomp, so I go for another Iron Head, hoping to take it out in one shot, and I just barely manage to edge it out. Next up is Milotic, and even at +6 attack, my calc said I can't take this thing out, and with -2 special defense, this thing can just freely take us out with a Surf. Except I managed to pull off the flinch. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Iron Head has a 30% chance to flinch its target, but on top of that, I gave Kaiser the Razor Fang just so that it would have a higher chance. And look, Milotic was still more likely not to flinch, and it would have just taken us out with a Surf in that case, in which case we would have had to resort to using our 5 other Pokemon on the team. One thing to note is that I did make Brick Break my
4th move slot just to specifically deal with Lucario, and as soon as I defeated Roserade and heard the music play, that's when I knew that I defeated a Pokemon Platinum Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Steel types. And look, I had no idea I was going to be able to get through this deathless. This is only the 2nd time it's ever happened, and honestly, the more consistent time. I mean, I knew Steel types would be goated, but to the extent that they did, I didn't expect them to steal the show.